Welcome to Permission to Breathe, a transformative podcast dedicated to providing a safe space where you can inhale deeply and exhale freely while embracing your grief journey unapologetically. I am your host, Dr. Tammy Isaac, a spiritual practitioner, grief advocate and educator, author, and your guide on this journey through grief. This space was born out of the understanding that grief is not just an event, it's a lifelong unfolding. It's layered, it's complex, and often it's silence. And here is where we disrupt the silence. We will talk about the grief that lingers after the food stops arriving at your door, the grief that remains when no one calls and no one comes by to check on you, the grief that's complicated, the grief that's ancestral, the grief that lives in your body long before it ever reaches your tears. Every episode, we honor the humanity of grief, the anger, the confusion, the numbness, the longing, and we do so without apology. Whether you're navigating fresh loss, unspoken sorrow, or the weight of a world that just won't pause, this podcast invites you to sit down, breathe deeply, and give yourself the permission you've been waiting for to grieve, to feel, to breathe. Let's begin. Today's episode is sponsored by Let the Church Grieve by Dr. Tammy Isaac, a compelling book that explores the often overlooked subject of grief within spiritual communities. Dr. Isaac combines personal antidotes with theological insights, providing a compassionate framework for understanding and addressing grief collectively. This book emphasizes the need for spiritual leaders to create safe spaces for mourning and guides congregations through the grieving process with faith and empathy. It's a must-read for anyone looking to support those experiencing grief within their spiritual communities. Grab your copy of Let the Church Grieve at www.drtammyisaac.com today and begin the journey towards healing and growth. Today we're going to talk about friendships that fade after loss. When people think about grief, they usually think about the person who died, the relationship that ended, or the life that changed. What many people do not expect is how grief quietly rearranges friendships. Some people lean in, others pull away, and sometimes the people you were sure would stay are the ones who slowly disappear. If that has happened to you, I want to say clearly that you're not imagining it and you're not alone. You know, grief changes you. It changes your energy. It changes your capacity and what matters most to you. It can make small talk feel exhausting and surface level connection feel very heavy. And at the same time, your grief can make other people uncomfortable, not because they do not care, but because they do not know what to do with pain that they cannot fix. So instead of showing up in unperfectly ways, some people just choose to distance themselves. That distance can really hurt in ways that are hard to explain. There is the loss you expected, and then there is the loss of friendships you thought were solid. The texts that stop coming, invitations that, fade away, and conversations that never quite return to what they were. This episode is not about blame. It is not about keeping score. It is about naming what happens and giving you permission to grieve it. Because losing people during grief is not just sad, it's disorienting. In this conversation, we will talk about why friendships change after loss, how to make sense of the ones that fall away, and then how to grieve those secondary losses without turning the pain inward. We will also talk about what it looks like to release relationships without losing yourself in the process. If your circle looks different since your loss, I want you to take a deep breath and know there is nothing wrong with you. Let's talk about friendships that fade at loss. Grief does not just affect how you feel, it affects how you relate. After loss, many people describe feeling like the world kept moving while they were standing still, but it is more than that. Grief changes your inner landscape. And when the inside shifts, relationships cannot stay the same. Things that once felt easy may now feel draining. Conversations that used to energize you may feel heavy or empty. You may notice that you have less patience for surface level exchanges and less interest in explaining yourself. And that is not because you have become distant or difficult, but it's because grief rearranges what matters. Loss has a way of clarifying priorities, what deserves your energy, what no longer does. You may also notice changes in how you show up socially. You might talk less, you might cancel plans more often, you might need longer stretches of quiet, or you might find yourself wanting deeper connection instead of frequent interaction. At the same time, the people around you may still expect the version of you that existed before loss. The you who laughed easily, the you who carried conversations, the you who showed up without effort. That gap can create tension. Grief also exposes differences in lived experiences. If your friends have not encountered significant loss, they may not understand the weight you are carrying. You may feel out of sync, like you are speaking a language that they don't understand. It can feel lonely to be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. Another shift that happens is emotional bandwidth. Grief takes energy, okay? It asks for attention even when you wish it would not, okay? And that means you may not have the same capacity to hold other people's stress, drama, or expectations the way you once did. This is not selfishness, it is reality, okay? Relationships are built on mutual capacity. So when grief changes yours, the relationship has to adjust. Some can and some cannot. Grief also changes your tolerance for pretense. You may find it harder to smile through discomfort or pretend you are fine when you're really not, And that honesty can be unsettling for people who are used to keeping things light or avoiding hard topics. So sometimes what looks like distance is actually discomfort, not yours, but actually it's theirs. And it's important to hear me clearly. You did not become too much. You became more honest. And honesty can challenge relationships that relied on ease, distraction, or emotional avoidance. Grief reshapes relationships because it reshapes you. That does not mean you are broken. It means you are responding to loss in a very human way. Some people will meet you in that new space and others will not know how to. Neither outcome defines your value. It simply reveals that the relationship was built to hold. One of the most painful parts of grief is not just who you lost or what you lost. It is who could not stay. These are often the people you expected to be there, the ones who knew your story, the ones who showed up before, the ones who said, I've got you, and then slowly they disappeared. Now, at first, it can be subtle. Messages take longer to get answered. Check-ins become less frequent. Invitations then stop coming. And because you are already grieving, you may try to explain it away. You tell yourself that they're busy. You assume you are asking too much and you minimize your own disappointment. But over time, the pattern becomes harder to ignore. This kind of loss can feel personal. You may start questioning yourself. Did I say too much? Am I too heavy now? Did my grief make things uncomfortable? These questions make sense, okay? But most of the time, what is happening has very little to do with you. Grief makes many people uncomfortable because it confronts them with pain they cannot fix and realities they cannot control. It reminds them that loss can happen to anyone. And rather than sitting with that truth, some people choose distance. This distance is often about avoidance, not absence of care. Some people pull away because they are afraid of saying the wrong thing. Some pull away because they believe time alone is what you need. And some pull away because they do not know how to hold pain without rushing to actually solve it. And some people pull away because they only knew how to relate to you in the life you had before loss. Now, when grief changes you, it can expose the limits of certain relationships. Not everyone has the capacity to walk with someone through prolonged pain. Not everyone has learned how to stay present when there is no solution. Knowing this does not ease the hurt, okay? But it doesn't ease the hurt because it still hurts to be left behind. It still hurts to notice silence where connection once lived. And it still hurts to realize that support you counted on is no longer there. And because of that, you are allowed to grieve. What often makes this loss harder is that it feels invisible. There is no clear ending, no conversation, no closure, just a slow fade. And because there's no official goodbye, you may struggle to name it as grief, but it actually is grief. You lose a relationship you believed you would hold, and you lost a sense of safety. You lost a version of support that you once trusted. If someone pulled away during your grief, it does not mean you're too much. It does not mean that you're doing something wrong. It means they did not know how to stay. The truth can coexist with sadness, disappointment, and even anger. You do not have to explain it away. You do not have to make excuses for their absence, and you do not have to carry the weight of it alone. This is part of grief that deserves to be named. Not every friendship ends after loss. Some do stay, but they do not stay the same. These are the people who still show up. They still text, they still care, and yet something feels different. Conversations feel careful. You notice pauses where they did not used to be any. You sense an unspoken tension, even when no one is naming it. Sometimes this shows up as people avoiding the topic of your grief altogether. They ask how you are, but the question feels scripted. When you answer honestly, they change the subject or respond with quick reassurance, not because they are unkind, but because they are uncomfortable. Other times it shows up as pressure to be back to normal, pressure to laugh the way that you used to, pressure to move on without saying those words out loud. You may find yourself managing their discomfort, choosing your words carefully, editing your truth so the room feels easier, carrying your grief quietly so others do not feel burdened by it. That can be exhausting, okay? It's hard to be grieving and also feel responsible for keeping relationships comfortable. And over time, that emotional labor can create distance, even when the relationship technically remains. It's okay to name that loss too, okay? You can be grateful someone stayed and still grieve that the connection is not what it was. You can appreciate their effort and still feel sad that you cannot be fully yourself around them. Listen, grief changes you. It also changes the pace and tone of relationships. You may need deeper conversations now, more honesty, more space for silence. Some friendships are built for that and some aren't. Some relationships were built for lighter seasons. And this doesn't mean the relationship was shallow or meaningless. It means it was formed around a different version of your life, a different version of you. Now, it can help to release the expectation that things must return to how they were. Some friendships evolve into something quieter. Some find a new rhythm. Some stay at the edges of your life rather than at the center. You're allowed to let relationships find their new place without forcing them to fit where they no longer do. And you are allowed to protect yourself from feeling unseen, even when people mean well. If a relationship or if a friendship feels different after loss, you are not ungrateful. You are noticing reality. Staying does not always mean understanding, and the difference deserves care, honesty, and sometimes space. When people talk about grief, they usually focus on the main loss, the death, the diagnosis, the relationship that ended, the moment life changed, but grief rarely comes alone. Loss often brings a series of quieter losses with it. These are called secondary losses. They do not always get named, and because of that, they often go unacknowledged. Secondary losses can include the loss of routine, the loss of a sense of safety, the loss of identity, the loss of future plans, and the loss of community. And for many people, one of the most painful secondary losses is the loss of friendships. Now, when friendships change or fade after loss, the pain can feel confusing. You may tell yourself that you should be grateful for the people who remain. You may minimize your own hurt because the loss was not dramatic or public. There was no argument, no clear ending, just the distance. But the absence of a clear ending does not make the loss any less real. Friendships are part of how we regulate ourselves emotionally. They are part of how we make meaning, how we feel seen, and how we remember who we are. And when those connections shift or disappear during grief, the sense of isolation can deepen. What often makes secondary losses harder is that they are rarely recognized by others, because people may not understand why you are still hurting. They may assume you are stuck or dwelling when in reality, you are grieving multiple layers at once. You are not grieving just one thing. You are grieving a stack of losses, and each one deserves acknowledgement. When friendship is lost, or when friendship loss is ignored or dismissed, it can create shame. You may wonder why you cannot just move forward. You may feel guilty for being upset about relationships when you are already carrying so much, but grief does not work in compartments. Oh, how I wish it did. The loss of support, understanding, and companionship matters because connection matters. Losing people during grief can amplify the pain of the original loss. It can make you feel unprotected at a time when you are most vulnerable. Naming your secondary losses gives you permission to grieve fully instead of selectively. It allows you to say, this hurts too, without comparison of hierarchy. One loss does not cancel out another. When you name these losses, you also begin to understand your reactions, the anger, the sadness, the withdrawal, the exhaustion. These are not overreactions. They are responses to cumulative loss. You do not need to justify your grief. You don't need to rank your pain, and you don't need to minimize what has changed. Secondary loss matters, and it matters because they change how grief is lived day to day. They affect how supported you feel, how safe you feel, and how much space you have to heal. Acknowledging them is not self-pity, but it is honesty. And honesty is part of finding your footing again. After grief changes your friendships, a question often rises quietly in the background. Do I keep holding on, or do I let go? This is not an easy question, especially when loss has already taken so much from you. The idea of releasing more can feel overwhelming, and yet holding on to relationships that no longer feel mutual can cost you in ways that are hard to see at first. Releasing a relationship does not have to mean cutting people off or burning bridges. Often it is quieter than that. It can look like stopping the chase, letting go of the need to explain yourself over and over, allowing effort to be shared rather than carried alone. What matters most is how you release. So releasing does not require you to abandon yourself. It does not have to silence your grief to stay connected. You do not have to perform strength to keep people comfortable. You do not have to minimize your pain to make room for others. If a relationship requires you to disappear in order to remain, that cost is too high. Letting go can be an act of care, caring for your emotional energy, caring for your healing, and caring for the parts of you that are already carrying more than enough. This does not mean you stop loving people. It means you stop asking them to be what they cannot be. There is also a difference between releasing expectations and releasing people. Okay, I'm going to say that again. There is also a difference between releasing expectations and releasing people. Now, sometimes the healthiest move is adjusting what you expect rather than ending the relationship entirely. Allowing a friendship to exist with less intensity and less reliance and less emotional demand. You are allowed to choose the distance without the drama. You are allowed to step back without explanation, and you are allowed to protect your capacity. Grief teaches discernment. It sharpens your awareness of what drains and what supports you. Paying attention to this is not selfish, but it is necessary. As you consider which relationships to release, ask yourself gently now, do I feel seen here? Do I feel pressured to be more or to be someone I'm not? Do I leave this connection feeling lighter or heavier? And know that your answers matter. How you answer these questions matter. Now, releasing relationships without losing yourself means honoring your limits and trusting that not everything is meant to be carried forward. Some connections were meant for a season. Others will grow into something new, and some will quietly fall away. None of these outcomes diminish who you are. When some relationships fall away, you can feel like the ground beneath you has shifted. Like there is often fear in that space, fear that you will be left alone, fear that connection will not return, fear that there is what your life will look like now, right? But grief does not only remove, it also reshapes, right? So as your world becomes quieter, you may notice that the connections that remain feel different, slower, more intentional, less performative. They may be fewer people, but more room to breathe. New connections often form in unexpected ways. Ask me how I know. Through shared experiences, through quiet understanding, through people who do not rush your story or try to fix your pain. These are relationships built on presence rather than performance. You may also find that some existing friendships will deepen when there is room for honesty and silence. Connection can grow in ways it never had the space before. These relationships may feel grounded, even if they look simpler from the outside. And grief often refines connection rather than expands it. So instead of asking who has known you the longest, you may begin asking who can sit with you as you are now, who listens without redirecting, who does not need you to be okay in order to stay. Making space does not mean forcing new friendships or replacing what was lost. It means allowing connection to meet you where you are rather than where you used to be. Know that you are allowed to take your time here. There is no deadline to rebuild community. There is no requirement to feel the quiet quickly. Sometimes the most meaningful connections arrive slowly after you have made room for honoring what needed to fall away. As your life continues to change, trust that your relationships will continue to evolve too, not all at once, not without grief, but with intention. And in time, connection can return in forms that feel steady, honest, and sustainable. As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to remind you of something very important. If grief has changed your friendships, it is not because you have failed. It is because loss changes how we move through the world. Some people are able to adjust with you, others are not. Both realities can exist without turning the story against yourself. You have named a lot today. The friends who pulled away, the ones who stayed but felt different, the losses that came on top of loss, and the quiet work of letting go without losing yourself. And all of it matters. It's okay to miss people who are no longer present in your life, even if they are still living. It is okay to feel sad about connections that could not stretch with you. And it's okay to stop carrying relationships that require you to silence your truth. Before we close, I want you to take a moment to check in with yourself. Who feels safe to you in this season? Where do you feel able to speak honestly without editing yourself? What relationships allow you to show up as you are, not as who you used to be? You do not need many people. You need a few who can stay present. And even if that circle is small right now, it does not mean it will always be this way. Grief narrows before it expands. It clears space before it fills it. And as you move forward, be gentle with yourself. Let relationships find their place naturally. Trust what feels steady. Release what feels heavy. And allow connection to return in ways that honor you and the you are becoming. Thank you for taking this time. Thank you for listening. And until next time, give yourself permission to breathe. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Permission to Breathe podcast. I want to invite you to sit with it just a little bit longer. Notice what came up. Notice what feels heavy and what feels clear. And know that there's no rush to resolve any of it. You can also read the companion blog to this episode found on my website at www.drtammyisaac.com along with the show notes. If this conversation was helpful, you are welcome to share it with someone who may need it or leave a review so others can find their way here. And join me next Monday for a new episode of the Permission to Breathe podcast. And as always, take care of yourself gently. And until next time, give yourself permission to breathe.